Where's Mr. Tegley?
Oh, you're standing in him.
My expectations of Kraven the Hunter actually being good was low to begin with. Yet somehow, this film managed to exceed those expectations. Just not in a good way. After the shit shows that were Madam Web and Venom 3, I don't even know why I bothered. Well, that's a lie. I went and watched it so I could tell you good people why it's not worth your money. So make sure to stick around and find out exactly why you shouldn't go and watch Kraven the Hunter. Let's get into it. Kraven the Hunter is directed by J.C. Chandor and is supposed to be the origin story of one of Spider-Man's most infamous villains. Instead, it's more like the origin story of Kraven the eco-activist. Sony keeps making the same mistake over and over with these Spider-Man villain movies, which is making them heroes. Sure, villains can see themselves as heroes of their own stories, but they should still be villains. Really, these origin stories should be the true villain origin stories, showing us exactly why they turn to villainy from their point of view. Especially seeing as they refuse to put Spider-Man in any of these movies. Put it this way, in comics, Kraven's a big game hunter that hunts for sport, with Gola proving is the greatest hunter in the world. And unlike other hunters, he typically disdains the use of guns or bow and arrows, preferring to take down large, dangerous animals with his bare hands. His mere presence is intimidating. In the film, however, Aaron Taylor-Johnson's presence is far from intimidating as he should be. Not only that, he doesn't hunt animals at all, he only hunts humans. In the film, Kraven's not a villain in any way, shape or form. At best, you can call him an anti-hero, as he kills people, but he's definitely not a villain. In the comics, Sergei Kravenov was born to Russian aristocrats and raised in Volgograd and St. Petersburg, where Sergei Kravenov grows up with his half-brother Dmitri, and due to being beaten by his alcoholic father, Sergei in turn torments Dmitri throughout the childhood. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the Kravenovs are forced to immigrate in disgrace to the United Kingdom, and then later the United States. Shortly after, Sergei's father dies, and his mother is remanded to an insane asylum, where she ultimately commits suicide, and Sergei becomes haunted by images of the squalid, spider-infested asylum. Now orphaned, Sergei learns to survive by his wits and cunning alone, and he starts to travel extensively, usually as a stowaway aboard cargo ships or trains, and lives in one time or another in every major city in Europe and Asia by his late adolescence. Then, in his passage through Equatorial Africa as a young man, Kravenov, now going by Kraven, discovers his natural talent for hunting and departs the safari to live on his own in the African veld. By adulthood, his hunting skills are legendary, and he quickly becomes a wealthy big game hunter. He remains in Africa for around 10 years, during which time in the Belizean Congo, he steals a witch doctor's herbal potion that enhances his physical prowess. The potion's rare naturally occurring mutagenic chemicals heightened his speed, strength and agility, whilst greatly decelerating his aging process. Kraven then uses these new heightened abilities to hunt game more efficiently and enters into a business partnership to export the animal skins and ivory that he acquires from his hunts, starting his own criminal enterprise. Now in the film, instead of being born to Russian aristocrats, he's essentially born into the Russian mafia. Sergei still grows up with his half-brother Dmitri, but he is kind and protective of his younger brother, of course to make his character more likeable and heroic. After Sergei's mother dies, his father forces Sergei and Dmitri to go to Africa and go on a hunting safari, where Sergei disapproves of the way his father hunts, saying a true hunter wouldn't use a gun. Then whilst on the safari, Sergei gets mauled by a lion, and this is where we're introduced to Calypso, who's been given a magic potion from a grandma that can heal any wound. Why does she have a magic healing superpower potion, you ask? Because Sony doesn't have the rights to Wakanda, so she just does. And of course, Calypso finds the injured Sergei, gives him the potion, which then in turn gives him his powers. Shortly after recovering and returning home, Sergei spouts on about how he's now a different person. He then runs away from home and goes back to Africa, and this is where the film character really diverges from the comic book character. Because of course, you can't have the hero of the story be a big game hunter. So instead, he protects the animals and hunts the big game hunters. In my opinion, these movies would actually be good if they kept the Spider-Man villains as actual villains, instead of making them all heroes. You can make villains likeable and still have them be evil as fuck. But nah, why do that when they can give us Spider-Man villain movies without Spider-Man and where the villains are the good guys? Just doesn't make sense. What's worse is Sony released Spider-Man 2 on the PS5, and that Kraven's perfect. In fact, if you want a good Kraven story with an accurate Kraven the Hunter, I suggest you just go and play that game.
You've been in your shadow for hours, but you sense nothing.
Pathetic.
Overall, the story throughout the film is boring as fuck, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. Basically, after the time skip, for no real reason, Kraven goes around hunting gangsters and drug lords. Bear in mind, his father is literally the head of a Russian mafia, and then after doing that for a bit, Kraven goes back to the UK to visit his brother for his brother's birthday. Meanwhile, a gang lord called the Rhino, who used to work for Sergei's father, starts to believe he might be on Kraven's hit list. So, after finding out who Kraven is, decides to kidnap his brother Dimitri. Then of course Kraven has to go and rescue his brother, and that's essentially the film. And to be honest, I think I've actually made the film sound better than it actually is. Overall, the story in Kraven the Hunter is about as basic as it gets. Nothing about it feels fresh or original, it's the kind of story you've seen countless times before. The biggest issue is how incredibly boring it all feels. Sergei's motivations are serviceable, but never compelling. His hatred for his father Nikolai is a clear driving force, but the film never explores it in a deep or meaningful way whatsoever. The stakes are low, the twists are predictable, and there's nothing unique about the narrative to keep you engaged. And the pacing's just bad throughout the entire film. It's like Venom 3. By halfway through, I just wanted the film to end. And on top of all of that bullshit, the way Sergei finds people or targets is laughably lazy. The film tries to hand-wave it away by saying that's just what he does or it's his job, but there's no real explanation or logic behind it. It's just a full-on cop-out. A shit shortcut to move the plot forward without putting in any effort whatsoever to make it believable. And instead of feeling like a skilled hunter, Sergei often just comes across as someone with plot armour, who conveniently knows where to go at all times. It's just ridiculous. Now, as for the characters themselves, throughout the entire film, I only really found two characters interesting. The Rhino, played by Alessandro Nivola, and Dmitry Smerdikov, played by Fred Hershinger. Now, what I like most about Alessandro's take on the Rhino is he isn't just playing some big dumb brute. He's a smart and calculating man. Alessandro manages to capture the character's vulnerability and rage perfectly, and manages to give depth to an otherwise one-dimensional character. It's just a shame he doesn't have much screen time. Like, there's no real backstory or motivation for the Rhino, except he thinks he could be on Kraven's hit list. And so for no real reason other than that, he decides to make Kraven a target, and that's it. That's his entire motivation. Meanwhile, Kraven has no idea who this guy is. Now, the way they've done the Rhino's powers in this film was pretty decent, and unlike the Amazing Spider-Man 2, he's not just a guy in a Rhino mech suit. Instead, he's been genetically altered into a human-Rhino hybrid and has to take this special serum to stop his transformation and to keep him human, as his transformation into the Rhino causes him immense pain and anger. It's just a shame we didn't see how he came to get the procedure or why he got it. Again, zero backstory. And we only get to see the full Rhino transformation for about 5 minutes at the end of a 2-hour-long film. And when he finally went full Rhino, I couldn't help but laugh because that CGI face they gave him looked so fucking ridiculous. Trust me, the CGI throughout the film was pretty consistently terrible. Side note, is it just me or is CGI going backwards? Honestly, I feel like it's getting shitter and shitter every year. Anyway, I honestly believe the CGI on the Rhino's face is a joke. It must be. Like, who the fuck honestly saw the Rhino's face in production and thought, yep, that's perfect. It's just so bad it borderline stupid. As for Dmitry Smerdikov, played by Fred Hershinger, he's probably the best written character as well as the most interesting character in Kraven the Hunter. Early in the film, we discover he's got a unique talent as an expert voice impersonator. However, it's not this big flashy skill that's thrown in your face, it's done with subtlety that makes it all the more engaging. Hershinger's Dmitry uses his mimicry in small personal moments, like jokingly impersonating his brother Sergei or perfectly mimicking the father's tone and speech patterns during tense family interactions. There's even a moment where Dmitry sings along to a song, and for a second you think it's the original artist until you realise it's him. It's these understated uses of his ability that make it believable and grounded, rather than over the top. The film also cleverly plants the seed for his nickname the Chameleon, when his father comments on his knack for blending in and adapting to situations. He's not a tough guy though like the rest of his family. Dimitri's a bit of a wimp but wants to be brave and tough. You get to see his character develop and change throughout the film. If they'd done a Chameleon film instead of a Kraven movie, you never know, this film might have actually been good.
What would you say was a highlight of making this film in particular?
I didn't like the character of the Chameleon was one that has so many interpretations in all of the comic books that it was really fun to be able to read through and look at and study all these kind of different interpretations.
Okay, let's talk about the main man himself, Kraven the Hunter, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson. Now, I like Aaron Taylor Johnson as an actor. He's done some great roles, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in 28 Years Later next year. However, I feel like he was the wrong choice for this particular character. He just doesn't have the physical presence of Kraven the Hunter, and it shows in the film. People in the film look at him like he's a weak nobody. Now look at the physical presence of Kraven in Spider-Man 2 on PS5. Nobody's going to look at him and think he's a weak nobody. In my opinion, Kraven should have been done similar to how Thanos was, using a combination of CGI and motion capture. But based off the rest of the CGI in the film, I can see why they didn't. Another thing I don't get is Kraven's accent. In the film he's got an English accent, like a posh South London accent. Like why? Why do that? Sergei Kravinoff is Russian and has a Russian accent, and what's worse is Aaron Taylor-Johnson can do an Eastern European accent. He even does one in the bloody film. But no, he's just putting that on, and instead he has an English accent. It's like, seriously? As for the rest of the cast, they aren't really worth mentioning. It's just a bunch of forgettable characters who you won't remember in a week's time. Now, the movie had plenty of action, with an abundance of bloody and gory scenes, clearly designed to keep viewers on the edge of the seats. Yet despite all of the chaos and carnage in the action sequences, I actually found myself really bored most of the time. I'll admit, the bird trap kill was pretty cool. However, most action scenes just felt like a mismatch of tropes I've seen countless times before, lacking both originality and emotional investment. To make matters worse, the poorly executed CGI further dragged down the experience, making even the most intense moments feel hollow. Then on top of the lacklustre action sequences and terrible CGI, the soundtrack, or rather lack of one, was completely absent, or at best forgettable. So ultimately, the combination of unoriginal action, poor CGI and a non-existent soundtrack turned what could have been an adrenaline-fueled thrill ride into a dull and forgettable slog. So honestly, do not watch this film. It's fucking shit. It's not worth your money and for damn sure ain't worth your time. Unless you're a fan of Venom 3 and Madam Web, which in that case go for it. You might have a good time. But like I said, if you want a proper Kraven the Hunter story, play Spider-Man 2 on PS5. He's an absolute beast in that game.
They said you were a killer. Imagine my disappointment.
Until next time, peeps, stay frosty.